There have been some people who have gotten upset about my video, Hipsters Gentrification and the Negro. And what a lot of people don't understand is that I have lived in the South Bronx for 42 years, and I understand how these cycles work. Now, right now, there are a lot of white people moving into these inner city neighborhoods and trying to call themselves living this hipster lifestyle. But sooner or later, this is going to change. And the Negro is one of the variables that will lead to this changing. What's going to happen is a lot of these white folks who move into these areas are going to learn the hard lessons that their fathers and grandfathers taught them about this Negro. Because you just can't live around this guy. And what he's going to do is he's going to eventually break into your apartment and steal your items. And I've seen this happen on the news quite a few times. He's going to break into your business and steal from you. And in many cases, what he's going to do is he's going to, if you have a nice car, he's going to put a brick through the window. This is what Negroes do in this neighborhood all the time. And eventually, as I stated before in the previous video, you're going to get tired of dealing with that stuff. You're going to get tired of filling out those insurance claims, going down to police precincts to fill out those police reports, and losing days of work. This is what happens in areas like this all the time. And this is why people move out of these areas, because you just get tired of dealing with it. If you have the economic resources to afford better, you will pack your stuff up and eventually move out, because you're going to realize that every week having to deal with somebody trying to break into your apartment or somebody smashing up your car, this becomes a bit of a headache. And there are other variables in addition to this Negro that are going to lead to the eventual white flight from inner city areas. And the other variable is, like here in New York, the Democratic Party. Now, a lot of people think that what does the Democratic Party have to do with this? Quite a bit, because your Democratic Party, these liberals, pretty much are very, very soft on crime. Here in New York, we have District Attorney Cyrus Vance saying that he's not going to pursue certain quality of life issues with prosecution. What he's going to do is instead give people desk appearance tickets for things like public urination, open containers, and having small amounts of weed. And what guys like these liberals don't understand is that when you give small offenses like this a pass, it leads to the escalation of crime. Because when you catch a guy for these small offenses, what happens is usually you may find out that this guy has a warrant. And that pretty much may take a criminal off the street. Or you may find out that by taking that guy off the street, you may prevent a later crime long term, because once this guy is either drunk or high, he's pretty much going to go out here and commit a crime. So you have prevented a crime from occurring by dealing with that small offense. And that was part of Rudy Giuliani's campaign to improve the quality of life in New York City. But here we have prosecutors like your Cyrus Vance and your Ken Thompson and the Bronx DA talking about they're going to give these small offenses a pass, and that's going to lead to an escalation in crime. And as you, Mr. Hipster, are going to learn is that these small offenses not being dealt with is eventually going to lead to this individual either trying to slash you on the subway after he's smoked up some K2, or he's going to go to your house to break into it. This is one of the offenses that's going to happen. They don't understand how this is a slippery slope and how your Democratic Party is creating a slippery slope regarding crime, because that was one of the reasons why people wanted to move back into these inner city areas, because the crime rate is down. But when you have a Democratic Party in charge of an area like this, guess what's going to happen? Your crime rate is going to escalate. And there are other variables that also factor in to these hipsters going to eventually move out of these areas. And one of them is going to be this so-called 20-minute commute. You see, a 20-minute commute is nice in the beginning because you're not on the road too long, but eventually the 20-minute commute turns into a nightmare, because sooner or later your boss is going to understand that, hey, he can only be here in 20 minutes. I know who to call for overtime, and that's going to make you go, oh no, every time you're getting called for overtime or you're getting called to work Saturday because you work 20 minutes away from the job. So they know that you're going to be able to be called in, and you're going to and because you don't want to keep a job, you're going to be the guy who they constantly call in to work on Saturday, work nights, work late nights, and eventually that's going to start grating on you, in addition to coming back to that tiny little apartment where you have to deal with these big radios being played, especially in the summertime, these boom cars being played in the summertime. Again, going back to the quality of life campaign that Rudy Giuliani implemented, that your Democrats are now trying to dismantle. You're going to have to deal with that boom car sitting there pumping its stereo for 4 or 5 hours up until 2 a.m. because I've had to deal with that living here in New York. You're going to have to deal with these strange smells from different types of food, and that's going to grate on you when you live in a small apartment like you live here in New York City. And eventually, this starts to get on you, in addition to the 20-minute commute that leads to overtime and the overtime nightmare. And in addition to dealing with these issues, the other variable that's going to make a lot of these hipsters get ready to pack their bags is their woman. These white women, they are not going to want to live this hip and cool lifestyle for long. Sooner or later, they're going to look at this big city and say they're going to get tired of it, because they're going to get tired of having to deal with the noise, the smells, and husband not being available due to working, mega crazy overtime. And she's going to start looking at those houses out there in the suburbs and say to herself, I want a nice home. And she's going to start pestering her husband saying, or her boyfriend saying, why don't we move? Why don't we find some nice place to live? Or she'll start nagging and saying, this apartment's so tight and so cramped, and it's uncomfortable. I really want a bigger place. And that's what's going to lead a lot of people thinking about getting out of these neighborhoods again, because white men, for the most part, are simps. And if their woman wants something, they're pretty much going to give it to them. So eventually, they're going to start looking at those houses. They're going to start looking at those homes because their woman is going to want to live in them. And another thing that deals with this white woman is that she is going to start looking, especially if she has kids, she's going to start looking at these schools. And when she looks at these schools, she's going to look at them and say, the education here is pretty much substandard. And there aren't many amenities for me to put my son in. There aren't many reading programs, there aren't many math programs, and there aren't many advanced programs because most of the students in these inner city areas, they lag behind the rest of the country. So they're going to be looking at those programs and saying to themselves, this is going to get old. I don't want to bring my kids and put them in these failing public schools. I don't want to put them in these charter schools because the charter schools, in spite of all the gimmicks, have the same crap curriculum. And there are not really many amenities. In addition, there aren't many places you can take a child to go play in, like parks and other areas. There aren't many open spaces. And in the suburbs, you have a lot more open spaces for kids to go in. In the city, it's very tight, and it's not a good place really to raise children, especially when you're in a small, cramped apartment. If you're in a small, cramped apartment, it gets even more cramped and frustrating when you have to deal with 2 or 3 kids. And that's another reason why the white woman is going to want to move, is because she's going to sit there and realize that having 2 or 3 kids in an apartment, not really what you want to do. And she's going to start bugging her husband, say that this hip and cool lifestyle, yeah, it was cool for 1 minute when you have no kids, but when you have 2 and 3 kids, you're going to want a nice home so that those kids can have a backyard to go play in, open space for them to sit in, and room for you to breathe, because this apartment, this lifestyle it's not what you want to live in. And the other thing that's going to make people, move out of these inner city areas is the wealth issue, because paying $5,000 a month for an apartment or $3,000 a month for an apartment, yes, that's trendy and it's great social currency, but you're not building any wealth. When you buy a home, you're going to be not only getting home ownership, but you're building wealth through the equity of that home. And the whole hip and cool apartment thing, you can't build any wealth with an apartment when you're renting, especially if you're renting. You're not going to be able to build wealth. All the wealth is going to that landlord. He's making money that he's going to be able to pass on to the next generation. Meanwhile, you, Mr. Hipster, you're losing money. Mr. Cool Guy, everybody's paying attention to you, and you're getting all this social currency, but you're not building any long-term wealth. And a lot of people, especially the white woman, is going to look at that and go, we want to have something to pass on to the kids. We want a nest egg for retirement. We want a nest egg for the kids. And what we're going to do is we really need to go buy a home. And that's going to be the pressure on the white male, especially the beta white male, to go out and get that home, because they're going to need or understand that they're going to need to build wealth. And the only two ways to build wealth are, one, through buying that home, and two, through a proper education. And they do not want to send their kids to these substandard, craptastic public schools, especially when they have to deal with these dysfunctional savages that are part of the public school system, especially the ones from the single mother households, because the kids from the single mother households primarily are a nightmare to deal with. These are the kids who are probably going to bully you, or at worst, or even worse, teach the white kids' sons and daughters the values of single motherhood. And those values, they pretty much compromise and destroy any sort of foundation that you want to have for teaching a culture of wealth and family values. Because single motherhood, the more values of single mothers are completely different from those of a two-parent household. And just having your kids around those type of values just for a short time, especially in places like your junior high schools and your high schools, that can pretty much destroy a child way into their adulthood, because the core values that they learn there, they're going to pass on. And this is one other reason why I say the gentrification pattern is going to eventually change, because people, again, as you grow older, you're going to start looking at the cities and saying, this is not really a place I want to raise children in. This is not a place where they can learn good values. This is not a good place where they can be safe, or this is not a good place where they can expand themselves. And sooner or later, as people get more money, as they start building up their economic base, that whole hip and cool lifestyle is eventually going to move. The people are going to move past it and then move on to a more traditional lifestyle, because you cannot really build wealth. You cannot build core values in a place like a city. There's no real place for family values or core values in an inner city area. It's the reason why that's the reason why their fathers moved. That's the reason why your grandfathers moved, and that's why people, the gentrification cycle is eventually going to end. That and the inability to maintain a middle class in these type of areas. When you're paying $4,000 or $5,000 a month for rent, again, there's no way for you to build wealth. So there's no way for a middle class to stay in these type of areas for too long. So that's why I say it's going to pretty much fall apart. It's a cycle, and a lot of people don't see the cycle. I've studied the cycle, watching different films and reading different books, and people eventually are going to want more. What you thought was hip and cool in your 20s, living in a tiny apartment, eventually gets old when you turn 25, 26, and even 30, because eventually you start thinking about building that nest egg for retirement, building that wealth, and building that platform that's going to make you more of an asset long term, not only to yourself, but to people who you want to get married to, who you want to get engaged to. And you don't want to be able to keep having to deal with things that are going to be obstacles in your way. Now, the things that I talked about in the Negro with the gentrification, that had to do with many of the nuisance issues. And those nuisance issues, eventually, again, they get very tiring to deal with. And the people, breaking into your house, putting bricks in your car windows, keying up your car. Eventually, again, you get tired of dealing with this, in addition to the job that you live so close to, where the boss is on you to keep working overtime because, hey, he wants to go out and go party or go do his thing, so he sends you to go do overtime. And eventually, that and the white woman continuing to harass these guys to get that bigger home, get that bigger car, get the money to get these kids into private school, so they don't have to deal with these Negroes and these other crazy people and live out in the suburbs. That's going to lead to an exodus eventually from the cities, because people, again, want to live a middle class lifestyle or a higher upper middle class lifestyle. And again, you cannot really do that in the city. The Sex in the City lifestyle is hip and cool for single people, but when you're trying to build a family, it is not really constructive. That's all I have to say for this video. You can comment, rate, and subscribe.